Got it. I'll advance to the next slide to tell you what we'll be doing today. So we're starting with, I'll give you some overall perspectives about team coaching and background about how we work at CoachSource in team coaching. And then we'll be getting into our case study, which I'm very excited to be here with Beta and sharing with you about this really powerful experience that we had together. And then we'll have, as Mary mentioned, have time for Q&A. So let's start by talking about, the International Coaching Federation did a good job in saying, okay, what are the different types of team development modalities? And so when you think about it, there's really 5 main modalities for developing a team. The first is team building, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. It's bringing people together to bond, to build their relationship. And it's usually more short-term, fun kind of activities. And then there's team training. And so that's about acquiring skills or knowledge for the team, and usually around some sort of structured learning curriculum. The idea is that there's a particular learning goal. It might be collaboration skills, or perhaps it's about how to be better strategic thinkers together as a team. And then you can think about team consulting, which is around a specific particular problem or challenge, and then you bring in a consultant as an expert advisor, and that might be like reorganizing your sales force, or perhaps around a particular acquisition that you're thinking about. And then there's team facilitation, which is really around the dialogue, the conversations, and usually around a particular goal. And we're talking mainly about process facilitation, so facilitating the process to achieve something you're working towards. So that might be something like strategic planning conversations, right? Working with a team to do that. And the 5th team development modality is team coaching, which is actually the broadest and the most impactful form of team development. And it's really because it focuses beyond those other things. And sometimes you will introduce those modalities into a team coaching experience. But team coaching really focuses on the dynamics of the team and how it can best meet its goals and the goals of the organization, of the company. So let me give you a definition. This is what we use at CoachSource. It's a comprehensive, custom-designed solution partnering with an entire team, offered over time to maximize a team's collective talents and resources to effectively accomplish the work of the team. So there's a couple of key points here about team coaching. First of all, that it's a custom designed solution, right? Every team is different in some way as far as its level of maturation, or the particular strengths that they have, or the challenges they're facing, or the development needs of that particular team. So it's important in team coaching to be very responsive to that particular team and what makes the most sense in working with that team. So that's one key point that's in this definition. Next one is offered over time, right? So unlike some of those other modalities, for the most part, team coaching is extended over a period of time. So there's ongoing connections, interface, team coaching sessions, and ways to work with the team over time. And so ultimately, it's really about having flexibility and working deeply with that team, and really expanding its dynamics and the ways they can better respond and address their challenges and how they work together to meet what they need to be doing and to support ultimately their goals towards for their organization. So one question I often get has to do with group coaching versus team coaching. What's the difference? Well, if you think about it, a team is always a group, but a group is not always a team. So when you do group coaching, it's often connected with a broader learning initiative. And it's a way of bringing together peers in a particular cohort that may be learning this thing together, or sometimes it is just bringing the group together to learn from each other. Ultimately, there's conversations, the coaching conversations in learning from each other and with a coach to guide that group, but they're not an intact team. Team coaching is focused on an intact team, and the goals are really for the team. What are their team goals versus Group coaching is really focused on the individual goals of the learners, of the members of that group. So hopefully that clarifies that confusion sometimes that people have about the differences. So let's talk about some use cases about when you might bring in a team coach. Now, some big bucket areas for when that happens is obviously when a team is underperforming in some way, shape, or form. So they're not meeting their goals, or they're not hitting their targets, or there's some kind of challenges around churn with customers, or there's attrition, or sometimes there's issues with internal stakeholders that just, seem to be some challenges with how that team is operating. And in some ways, that's where our case study would fit into some of the things that weren't happening well for this team and for their organization. Another time that can be very useful to bring in team coaching is with new teams. So either newly formed teams, sometimes when a reorganization happens, or maybe there's a new team leader, or some significant membership changes on that team. That can be a really good time as well to bring in team coaching. I can share with you some other examples that I've personally been involved with. So, and also in line with that new teams kind of idea is, for instance, I worked with a biotech startup, and they really wanted to get ahead of the game in putting structures in place and working ways of being together as a group and making decisions ahead of the, so that they were fully prepared for that growth that they were expecting in the future. And so that can also be a great time to bring in a team coach. Another experience that I wanted to share with you had really to do with a time when there was actually a leader who just didn't know how to be an effective team coach, right? This particular leader did not have a good model throughout his work life. And so he needed some support in helping to strengthen the team and learning how him to be a better leader of that team, and really to help them better reach their potential as a team. Another example was when there was actually a high-performing team. They were really productive and effective. They were incredibly results-driven. In fact, they were kind of overly indexed on results and didn't focus on a lot of other things. They were often running ahead of the rest of the organization. And they also had trouble really coming up with priorities. They just responded to everything all at once. And so one of the focuses of our team coaching was around better able focusing on priorities and how to better pace themselves and to be more connected with the stakeholders that they work with. One of the things to really consider in team coaching is not just the team by its unique self, but also it's a nested system. It's a system within a system. And so you have to look at the stakeholders involved around the team, and are you meeting the stakeholders' values? So it's high performance, but also high value teams that you're working towards. So what are some other, we welcome you to put into chat other times when you've brought in team coaching and why you brought it in. So let's see what might come up from your experiences. Or even things you might suppose would probably be good opportunities or you would like to talk about.
So Dan, Christine posted that the team has a new mission.
That's a great example. Really just support the team in reformulating their mission and all the goals related to that and how they approach those different new scenarios. Excellent, thanks.
And Carly said a lack of trust leading to a lot of the outcomes that you mentioned.
Right, absolutely. And one of the most important things that a team coach does that really is the most important variable in successful teams, that it's not the be all and end all, but it is so important, is psychological safety. And so working, team coaching very much will focus on that idea about building the trust within the team to be able to have those rich conversations, those vulnerable sharing of information and giving feedback so that they can be a really high-performing team.
Yeah, a couple others that came in working through a downsizing, restructuring, bringing together new and existing teams to build connection, merging teams, teams getting better at holding crucial conversations to hold each other accountable,
Mhm.
new team members joining, combination of existing teams, a global team in a turnaround,
Wow,
and
great.
moving toward the self-leading model.
Excellent. All obviously good reasons to do team coaching. So thank you all very much. That's really helpful to hear your variety of ways, because it's true. Team coaching can be very beneficial in many, many different scenarios. So I'd like to share with you the team coaching model that we use at CoachSource. This is the high-level model about the flow of what you do in team coaching. Each of these phases, by the way, can also reoccur at different points. It's not always straight linear form, but clearly at the beginning you do the discovery. And in that discovery, you're scoping out the engagement, you're learning more about the team and the people on the team, and figuring out exactly how you want to at least begin the team coaching experience. Then the design, as I mentioned, it's really important to be customizable. The teams operate in different ways as far as the cadence, as far as where to start, where to go with things. And then the delivery, obviously, again, goes along with the design, and that you make that as powerful and as useful a time as possible. And at the very end of a team coaching engagement, you want to review it and say, okay, what did we do? How do we, what were the ways that we improved and we got better as a team? And where do we need to keep growing so that after the team coach is no longer in the picture, the team takes on what they've learned and keeps going further. And so we'll be sharing more about that also around our case study about how we went through that process together. So I am very excited to be talking about this case study. Like I said, it was a very powerful time. It was very rewarding for me, and I think for the team as well. And let me tell you a little bit. So again, it was the Electronic Arts DICE leadership team, their studio. It was in Stockholm. And there were initially 9 members, and members did change to some extent throughout that time we were together. They made a decision to bring in a team coach. And over the time, I also did individual coaching engagements with 6 of the team members. And the engagement lasted over 22 months. And over the time, the significant, not significant, but necessarily the biggest events that we had were basically 7, generally 2 days. Sometimes it was 1 day. But that also included, there was, over that period of time, different times I would observe the team at work. We had intermediate remote sessions because it was in Stockholm. And so it's very flexible, again, in the way that's most appropriate in working with that particular team. So we began in the discovery phase, and the first step being in the scoping and really the beginning of the partnership. And I met with the HRBP and also Rebecca Cortez, the general manager. We'd have discussions about the scope of the engagement, and we looked at the current state of the team, obviously, and clarified the goals and the timescales of our work together. And then the second phase of discovery, particularly at the beginning, is the assessment. And so to do that, I met with every single team member, and that's the beginning of team, and the scoping is the beginning, but really making that initial contact with all the members of the team and really understanding their perspectives and their relationships and how they interface with the team. And we also decided that it would be useful to do individual assessments. In this case, we used the CDR 3D, which is almost identical to the Hogan. If you're familiar with the 3 Hogan leadership reports, this is the same thing with the CDR. It actually came from the same database, but it's a little different. And then I would do individual sessions with each of the individuals about CDR to help them understand their strengths and weaknesses and opportunities for growth in their own way. And that way, it was really useful for people to think about what can I do? How do I need to grow? And how does that interface with how the team needs to grow? So it's a really good way for people to start having more accountability about the team coaching engagement. And then we used an instrument by Insightful Edge called the Team Performance Accelerator. I like this instrument because it's about assessing the team and not the individual. Sometimes you'll have individual assessments that are used to look at the team, which, like the other one that I mentioned, the CDR, but the Team Performance Accelerator focuses on the key elements for effective team performance. Let me share with you the results of that. And so let me explain this to you. The red circle, the scores around that, are really what was the ideal rating for that particular element, right? So it's like if we were completely operating at the top of our game, what would we need to be in this particular element? The blue in the middle is actually where they say their current state was. So you can see there's some very large deltas. Motivation was very low, pride and belief was very low, having clarity about goals was low, strategy was a significant challenge there, and then the accountability of the team members as well was a big gap. Beto, how did you think about these results when you saw them?
Well, I can admit, I think for all of us on the team, the results were disappointing, but they were not very surprising either. It was a validation of what we knew inherently, and perhaps something that we hadn't dared to admit to each other at that point in time. So it gave us the tools and the ability to have conversations about those areas and where we wanted to improve them, because as the red line shows, we knew where we wanted to be.
Thank you.
So one question on that slide, Dan, is the ideal state, does the ideal state shift with each team? Is it determined by the team's goals, or are these the growth areas for teams across the board?
So, I mean, the red line was determined by the scores given by the members of this particular team. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but I will say that it's not uncommon to have very, high expectations. These are, within the 9 range out of 10. And, and so it's very hard to actually achieve that, but it does have some variability, and it also begins to show what the strongest deltas are to really where do we need to be focusing our attention. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you.
And it is not uncommon for most teams to have very high aspirations in this way. So the first time we got together was a 2-day event. It was actually an insight situation. And the focus initially was about what is team coaching, getting people oriented to what we would be doing together, as well as really learning more about each other, really recognizing each other as a person and understanding more about what people are all about. Then we share the assessment findings, like the data that I just showed you, and also perspectives that I heard, specific issues around from the individual interviews. And then also, actually, we used that CDR and looked at it as a team profile on all those 3 different report areas. And then we also spent time talking about what do the team members need to be more effective on the team and also at their work. And so it's really looking as an individual, what do you need to be more successful? And so that got to both what I need individually, but also what I need from the team. We did work around purpose, mission, and vision. And throughout, we talked about, okay, we need to look through all these things. And every time we would capture what's a goal for the team, for the team's improvement and development. And we also took time, so we squeezed in a tremendous amount. It was very rich 2 days to look at the strategic goals for the team and the organization. And one of the things I'll just mention is throughout all these events, it's also about having the powerful coaching conversations. So those are really where the top of the action happens when you have a team coaching session, event like this, is that opportunity to talk at a deepest level possible for the team. Beto, what was your experience at that first meeting?
I thought it was a very powerful event for us as a team. And what really, I would say, stands out for me during this event, I really think it was a pivotal moment for the team. You had been smart enough to, as a great coach, both read the team and read the situation we were in. And you had actually asked us to share individually an experience in our life, a challenge that we had to overcome. And since we were sitting in this, sitting in front of this large challenge, this big mountain that everyone was found daunting to climb, hearing what everyone in there actually had overcome in their life, it was both a great bonding exercise. People were willing to share this in a very vulnerable way, but you also realized I'm in a room with people who have overcome much larger things than this. And you had so much respect for the badasses that were together in that room. And you did really realize, you know what, we can do this. And that inspired hope in the team. At the same time, we connected on a very human level. So that really stood out for me.
Thank you. One of the topics that we came up with as far as a limitation was how the team, the leadership team's meetings went, how they were, the effectiveness of them. And, you know, it's significant because they were meeting an hour and a half for their full team meeting and then touch bases in the morning 4 times a week. If you think about it, this is the most important time for this team as far as it should be very worthwhile and beneficial and productive in those meetings, because this is the time they're all coming together as one. So in that process, I observed the team. I looked at the cadence and the structure and the focus on the purpose of those meetings and came up with a little report. I met with Bette and a colleague around talking about those things and what kinds of improvements were needed. And we talked about how it might be completely revamped, and then rolled out that. And then I kept observing and supporting them. You know, Bette ended up becoming the facilitator for those meetings. And so we worked together about, you know, what's the best way to be a strong facilitator in those situations. Bette, what was this like for you?
Well, learning and understanding how incredibly important role the facilitator has in meetings was an unlock, I think, both for me and for the team as well. When we went through all the change management that we had to do, those 22 months, it became very clear that this strong operational model, like these meetings that we had, these connection points that we had, this is really what made us successful in many ways, because when everything else was changing, this is where we could always connect, we could come together, we could take rapid decisions, had high psych safety in the team, and could make us very effective as a team as we were moving through the changes. At the same time, everything that was an unknown, we could always bring it there. So there was nothing that was left and nothing fell between the tiers, because it always came there and we took care of it as a team. So I would say that it was a bit of a surprise, I think, to the team to realize how important this structure and the moderation was to actually drive us together towards our goals.
Right. And one of the things you and I talked about the other day was, you know, oftentimes it's the team leader, the senior leader, who's actually running those meetings, and that's not always the best thing. They certainly are a critical participant in discussions, but sometimes it's good to have a facilitator, like the role that Bette took on, also as chief of staff and as, you know, the strategy lead. But because that way it frees up that senior leader to be able to participate in the conversations and not have to worry about the facilitation of the meeting itself.
Exactly. And that was one of the things that we did, like the ownership of the agenda and the moderation came to me. So I set the priorities for the meetings. So this was about the team collaborating together. This was not a one-to-many meeting for the leader. And yes, of course, her agenda sometimes needs to trump other things, but that is actually my decision to have those things trump, because I often have a wider lens on what's happening in the studio. So I set the priority based on what I'm hearing from all the leaders on the team. So it's been very effective for us. And when it comes to moderation as well, reading the whole room, making sure that everyone gets heard, reading the facial expressions, and making sure that everyone has a space and feels seen and heard as we're conversating and moving our decisions along.
Great, thank you.
And Dan, did engagement also include one-on-one coaching in addition to team coaching sessions?
Yeah, so we did contract to have 6 other one-on-one coaching engagements, comprehensive coaching engagements with 6 of the team members over time. at different points throughout. One of the things I will say that sometimes people say, well, should the team coach do individual coaching as well or not? And my answer is always kind of depends. It really depends. In this case, I think it depends a lot on the psychological safety and the maturity of the senior leader. And Rebecca was very open, very interested in people getting support as well on an individual level. And so it also obviously was also helpful for me because I was getting different perspectives. And of course, with very clear understanding of the boundaries of what could be shared, what I would share and what I would not share. And so, of course, I honored the confidentiality of our individual sessions as well. So that was like the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 months that we did those activities. And then we had many, many more over time, another maybe year and a half or a little less. And I'm just sharing with you, obviously we can't go through a lot of the detail, but the themes, we were continually finding ways to build that connection and the resilience of the team and promoting that honest communication and focusing specifically on how the team communicated together, worked together, and the operating principles that would make them the most effective. And so we continually were aware of that and working on that. And obviously the emerging challenges, I have to say, it's a very fast-paced industry. I mean, there's constantly new things coming up. And so when I mentioned flexibility before, sometimes we would have a 2-day event and we'd have to basically throw out at least half the agenda because it's something that was emergent and that was important to work with for the team to focus in that way. And then really staying connected on those goals. So it's really important to come back to, we're working on this, how are we doing on this one, as well as obviously the strategic goals and making sure everybody's on track. And then we also did some deep dives around how the team made decisions and the prioritization process that they went through around what to focus on. So that's just some examples of things that we did pay attention to. Beta, thoughts from the other events we did?
Yeah, there were, one of the things that kind of came to mind is that when it's as so many leadership teams, a very action-driven team, which meant that these events were also very good for us to take a step back and reflect on our own, kind of how we're connecting with each other and how we're doing as a team. In the sense, for example, we went through an intense period during our organizational changes and as we were rolling them out, and we wanted to make sure in one of the events that there was nothing left unsaid. And if there were any hurt feelings or anything that had to be said or had to be brought out and hadn't been done so yet, that we'd make space for those things. So we could continue as a team, continuing to be whole and committed and make sure that the team felt safe. So we did an extra round on doing that. And that was a really great way for us to check in. Because like I said, the team is action oriented. So they tend to move forward. And sometimes the answer needs to be to stop instead of pushing forward.
Yes. Absolutely. Thanks.
And Dan, if you could speak to, I know that you're going to go into what the results were, the before and after picture, but how did you measure the impact of the events? So the events and activities, was there any specific thing that you did in terms of measuring the impact of those?
We tried to end with the summary and seeing, where people were at the end of the events. And then, but that was pretty much it. We didn't do actual measurements specifically on the events. I mean, they were very productive and we actually had a lot of output. So that was kind of the way we went.
Yeah, I would also add that we asked for feedback all the time to make sure that the people, the team would actually have ability to impact if there's something that had to be done differently, both in, for example, the way we were working and also in these larger sessions. And we sometimes made some adjustment along the way. But that's something that we used as a indicator of how things were going.
Yes, I know you really put your finger on the pulse of where the team was at.
And someone is also just amplifying the point you made that this was not accomplished in a short amount of time. Is there an average amount of time investment to ensure success?
That's a good question. I mean, this was a very comprehensive engagement, and it was over, 22 months. I would say a more standard time is 6 months to a year, sometime within that range. So it really varies with the needs and with the focus and the, and the resources available. But it's, I would say more, 8 to 12 months is an average time for a team coaching engagement. But obviously, it also can be very effective to have a more comprehensive, even longer time frame.
Thank you.
So we ended with a review, a meeting to really go over, what took place. As I mentioned, we're going to look in a minute at the comparison of the scores on that team assessment. We reviewed at a high level all of the events, a lot of the output of what we did in that time together, really to, honor the work that they had done. And then at the end, we talked about what are the next steps. Okay, what do you need to do to continue being a high-performing, high-value team, so that at the end of the team coaching engagement, hopefully the team is, has grown and learned a lot and can really take on the work themselves and going forward. So that's how we closed out the engagement. Let me share with you. This is okay. Let me explain. So if you remember the center in this graph, this is actually the original scoring on the different elements that are important in team performance. This is at the end of the engagement, they retook the assessment, and the red is where they were at that endpoint, which is just in December. And look at that, pride and belief, 82% increase, motivation, 73% increase, the clarity of goals, 75% increase, accountability, 71%. These were huge gains in these areas. Openness and trust, 49%. It was already a higher score, but it went up even, way more. And so that was one way that we were able to see that the effort of doing this paid off. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and say that it was a very powerful, rewarding experience for me, and I think for the team, as Bette was saying, and it was also their effort, of course, that they made to make the changes and to grow that made this so successful. So thank you, Bette, and thanks to the leadership team.
Oh, but thank you, Dan. You were so pivotal and so important to us. I'm not sure if we could have seen the light without your help, but you were so important to us.
Thank you. So I'll turn it back to Mary.
What a great story. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Bette, for sharing with us. We're going to open up to Q&A. So if you have a question and you'd like to ask Dan or Bette a question, please raise your hand and we will unmute you. Just to remind you that our next First Friday gathering will be March 1st at 11 a.m. Eastern. And if you have any questions about bringing team coaching into your organization, you're welcome to contact me, Mary@coachsource.com, or your CoachSource account director. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dan, and I encourage you to use this opportunity to ask any questions that you have for Dan or Bette. All right. Well, I don't see any hands raised yet. Bette, would you talk more about you obviously were very engaged in wanting these changes to occur, and just, talking about the role of senior leadership in realizing success in any of these engagements.
Well, I would say that the most important thing was clearly that Rebecca Kutas, the general manager for DICE, she's the one who wanted that. She came in, she needed support for her and with her team, and her willingness, and I think, Dan, I think you agree with this, that she was completely willing to follow our leads
Yes.
as we were laying out this structure for the team and the journey that we took on, and how committed she was to support the team through it with whatever it would take. And of course, you have to say that this would not have happened without a fantastic leader like herself.
Mm-hmm.
And she leads with high psych safety first in her
Yes.
teams. And I think that's also why she understood it would be important to have a coach come in to support the team on that journey.
Thank you. Okay, Maria, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to ask your question.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you. This has been so informative, and I appreciate all the insights shared. And I was just curious, and I think Beta mentioned it, that the leader did have that willingness and openness to or awareness, I guess, that safety to join and be open to this. I'm curious
Mhm.
around, what do you do when someone's not that open and you know that it's something that they need? What are
Yes.
some strategies that we can use to help influence and help the leader to kind of get past this hurdle? Because we know that it's
Mhm.
going to be very beneficial for them, but it's hard to make that happen.
Right. I would say one of the things that's very helpful is sometimes early on in conversations with clients to bring me in so that they can have a talk to someone about, an expert at team coaching and to understand what it entails and to have a little more human contact around it and really understanding about the nuances. And one of the things I'll mention that's very important for the team coach to do is to continually honor the seat of the leader, right? It's not in any way that should be, a challenge, an opportunity to confront the leader. Not that people don't have an opportunity to share, but the point is that the senior leader of the group is pivotal to the success of the team coaching. And so, when having those, I find that when I talk to clients and the leaders of the potential teams getting team coaching, it can be really helpful for them to make it more accessible and understandable about what it entails. And that's part of the role also, obviously, the team coach, who's ever selected to work with that team, to help the leader of the team to feel comfortable and to start to open up and looking at their own challenges. I did work, recently with a team where the leader agreed to it, but there was, certain reluctance and a certain distance in how that person operated too. And at the end, he really started to open up and to recognize how he needed to engage more directly with the team. So, it's supporting the leader and understanding what it entails, and also an understanding that it's not going to be necessarily a threatening situation, but more about a way to support them.
Thank you.
And Dan is clearly the expert here, if I can add my 2 cents. And that's pretty much, I think, my leadership mantra. You should never let a good crisis go to waste. So there's that too. People often don't want to change until they have to.
That's very true. That is very true. America McNeil, you are next. Please ask your question if you would unmute.
Sure, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. So I have a question about the evaluation of the effectiveness of your training. And I saw the chart that you showed. I don't know the name of that chart, but where it had like the blue and the red spider type diagram, where it seemed like it was the current evaluation of their skills and their target evaluation before and after.
Right.
And so you showed, X% increase on various things. And so I was curious, it sounds like that was self-evaluation that individuals did. And I was curious about the validity and reliability of self-evaluation in this case.
Right. So that was, self-evaluation, but it was of all the members of the team. Absolutely. Sometimes, absolutely, we bring in stakeholders and we talk to stakeholders initially and involve them in the framing of what's going on, as well as at the endpoint. In this case, I think we really were focused specifically on this whole studio, and so we did not involve stakeholders directly in the engagement. But other times it is another way to really better understand about what's of value to them, and certainly that was, I think, Rebecca was having those conversations as well throughout the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, America. Torsten has a question. Congratulations on the results. I'm curious, what was the biggest challenge along the journey of that team, which the team coaching had to address?
Becca, do you want to have any thoughts about that before I say something?
I wasn't sure if we would actually agree on which one would have been the largest challenge. Well, finding time in the calendar to do all the work, that was definitely a challenge. But I would say that kind of throughout the time, not only did we have a fairly new team in the beginning, the leadership team kept evolving. So we had new members come and go throughout the period as well. And I think that was one of our challenges to how can we keep how can we make sure that all the good work that has happened, both with the team culture, our ways of working, our operation model, and the trust that was in the team, how can we maintain that in that volatile environment? And I think we did okay, Dan. I believe so.
Yeah. And that, one of the things we did to help make sure that it happened as smoothly as possible is we definitely did onboarding where we really educated, again, brought people in and learning each other when there was a new member that joined, and also understand the work that had been done previously, and as well as how they fit into moving things forward. So we made a specific focus of that when when the event happened after a new person came in, and we also honored people who left. So it's very important to really acknowledge a loss, because when a team member leaves, then you need to acknowledge, it's good to acknowledge what they brought to the team and what's the loss that happens when they leave, as well as obviously look at welcoming the new member and what they bring to the team.
Okay, Kevin Mayfield, if you unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Dan. It's informative. One of the things I'm always jealous about with external coaches or consultants is I feel like you have the opportunity to say no more often than we do internally, right? You could turn something down. When an individual coaching engagement comes to me internally, I think I know a short list of questions to ask to say, this might not be a good fit for coaching. This might be something else. But with team coaching, it seems like there's this expectation. Maybe it's going to be a little messy. No matter how weird it is up front, part of the reason for your job is to help them get through that. So I'd like to know if there are things you look for that say this team or this organization isn't ready to have a team coach. I mean, do you ever say no to a 22-month engagement, basically?
Well, that evolved over time too, by the way. Just the initial engagement was shorter, and then we extended the engagement. I would say there are times, if the leader of the team really is not engaged and is very resistant, it's going to be hard to move the needle with that team, right? Ultimately, they need to be on board for it to be effective. I would also say that sometimes you have to really think, is this team really a team? Is it needed to be a fully, a true team, and thinking of the definition of a true team versus, more as a conglomerate, right? Where there's the leaders over different areas. So, and the other thing is really thinking about, so if that's not what they really need, maybe they need something else, right, to become more effective. And maybe it isn't necessarily team coaching in that way, because they actually aren't interested in becoming a true team. And that's valid sometimes too.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I don't see any other hands raised, so I'll give one last round for anybody to ask a question. And if there aren't any more questions, thanks, Carly. We appreciate you being here. If there aren't any more questions, we will let you have 5 minutes back in your day. Thanks so much for being here. We look forward to seeing you again next month.